On the night Kate broke off our engagement, the apartment kept the shape of us for a few hours, like heat lingering in a room after someone has turned off the radiator. She said the words gently, like packing glassware. I love you, but I don't want this future. And there was the smallest pause before this, like she wished the word might walk itself back into silence. I'd told her 2 weeks earlier that I sometimes wore pantyhose under my jeans, that on quiet nights I took out a silk slip I'd bought secondhand and felt something unclench when the fabric slid over my skin. She had nodded then, eyes somewhere past my shoulder. She'd asked questions that sounded like boxes on a form. How long? How often? What else? And I'd answered without metaphor, because small truths deserve plain light. She said she needed time. Then she came back, not with time, but with a flat statement and a ring placed on the table like a coin that didn't belong to any country anymore. I don't know if the new guy mattered. Of course he mattered. He existed. But she said his name as if she were trying out a product sample, cheerful and impersonal. Evan and I have been talking, she said, and I realized I had been trying to sell her a home I hadn't finished building. The worst part was the neatness. She didn't yell. I didn't beg. The cat still licked its paw in the sun rectangle by the window. We divided cookware like we were doing math. When she left, she took the Dutch oven and the big colander and the way we had imagined Sundays. I tried every breakup ritual that makes the internet nod at you like a chorus of therapists. I ran until my lungs felt like hot paper. I alphabetized spices and then moved them back to chaos in case order would let grief find me more efficiently. I watched movies where men throw themselves under trains of feeling and emerge as poems. I lasted 3 days without looking at her Instagram, and then saw her in a backlit bar, his forearm on the table, her mouth soft with that look you get when you already know the end of the story and it's a happy one. I closed the app and opened the drawer where I kept the things that had outed my tenderness to the person I thought would hold it. The graphite pantyhose that shone like river light, the matte nude pair that made my skin feel evenly contained, the slip the color of milk tea. I didn't put any of it on. I just touched it the way you touch the names carved into a tree you didn't carve yourself. Friends called with the sturdy offers of beer and bowling, and you can crash on my couch if your bed sucks now. I said yes to the beer and no to the couch, and bought a second pillow anyway, which made the single bed feel haunted by the idea of two. I went to work and typed emails like a good corporate citizen. I lifted weights at a gym where the men's locker room smelled like detergent and bravado, and the particular embarrassed silence of men with private weather systems. I'd get home, make pasta, and then the hour would come when the apartment crackled with static, and I could either cry or slip my legs into nylon and slide a dress over my head and stand in front of the mirror and watch a different angle of myself arrive. The first time I put the slip on after Kate, I thought I would feel shame braided into the silk, like a hair worked into a sweater you can't unsee. Instead, I felt relief, pure, uncomplicated, like stepping into shade. I looked at myself and didn't think woman or man. I thought, here is my body when it's not bracing. The slip whispered as I moved, and I imagined every whisper saying I'm allowed. I slept that way and dreamed in textures, rain on a tent, apricot flesh split by thumbs, the steady tug of a boat rope against a dock. When I woke, the idea had organized itself in my head like a file that had been downloading in secret this whole time. Leave. New York made a clean kind of sense, the way a maze looks from above. I could be a person there whose past belonged to a state line, who could walk into a bar in sheer black pantyhose under jean shorts and be background noise. I put a notice in at work and told my parents I needed a new start, and told my friends I'd be back for holidays, and told myself I wasn't running away as much as running towards something with my arms out and my palms open. I found a studio in Washington Heights with a window that watched a stand of trees argue with the wind all day. The paint peeled and the radiator hissed like an old cat, but it was mine. On the first morning, I walked to the bodega in heather gray tights under a long sweater, and nobody cared. A guy on the corner selling used books told me I had excellent posture. A woman in a head wrap asked me if I wanted to try a mango slice with chili salt. A toddler pointed at my legs and said, "Shiny," with the gravity of a judge. I laughed. I cried. I drank my coffee from a paper cup that softened at the lip when I squeezed too hard. The city gave me permission by not noticing me, and then it noticed in ways that felt like being added to a mailing list you actually wanted to join. I found a vintage store on 181st with a rack of slips that smelled faintly of someone else's attic and someone else's triumph. I found a queer bar in the East Village where the bartender called me babe in that New York way that names you without pinning you. I wore a silk dress one night, tea-length, bias cut, green like the inside of a lime, and nylons that turned my legs into a suggestion rather than a fact. I danced alone and with strangers and with myself again when I went to the bathroom and caught my reflection in the mirror and did not flinch. There were nights I went further, testing edges the way you lick a knife to see if it's still sharp. A soft cut bra under a blouse with the top buttons undone so it didn't protest its existence. A little gloss on my mouth that tasted like strawberries had decided to major in chemistry. A wig from a theatrical shop that I wore exactly once because my scalp wanted to scream, and because it felt like I was wearing a mask of a mask. I liked the parts that touched my skin in ways that made my skin feel like an instrument tuned to itself. I was still heartbroken. It hung around like humidity. Kate would pop up in my mind at the most tedious, unheroic moments. Brushing my teeth, waiting for an elevator, counting out quarters for the laundromat. The grief took on petty shapes. I wanted to run into her and have her see me looking like the life that had rejected her rejection. I wanted to send a photo of myself in the green dress with a caption that said, "I made a cathedral you couldn't see." But the city didn't care about my petty revenge narrative, and slowly, neither did I. The feeling, if you can't beat them, join them, showed up. But it changed shape. It meant, if you can't beat the ache of wanting to be more yourself, join it. Don't fight the tide, ride it. I made friends in small, tender increments. A drag queen named Lana who worked mornings as a florist and taught me a trick for keeping stockings from snagging on hangnails. A trans elder named Viv who sat by the Hudson and knitted and told me stories about the 70s when everything was ugly and gorgeous in equal measure. "You don't need revenge, sweetie," she said, not unkindly. "You need revelry." I went to a clinic one afternoon, pamphlet in hand, and talked to a doctor about hormone therapy. The room was clean in that clinical way that makes your thoughts line up like bottles on a shelf. I used words I had tried on in my bathroom: dysphoria, euphoria, gender expansive. The doctor listened like music. She told me about effects and timelines and the way everyone's body negotiates change like a union. I made a follow-up for 3 weeks out. I walked out into winter light and bought myself a cheap slice of pizza and ate it standing up, the cheese trying to reach for my wrist. I felt possibility, and I felt the old tug of wanting to simplify my life to a single narrative because that would be easier to explain at parties and in holiday letters and to the mirror. I met Crystal in a coffee shop in the West Village that had 7 different brewing methods on the menu, and a bathroom with a chalkboard where people wrote couplets about espresso like they were auditioning for a poetry slam. I was in a sweater dress and opaque tights and a scarf my mother had knit in my first year of college. She was in a bomber jacket covered in enamel pins, tiny books, a cloud with legs, a cat carrying a knife with a banner that said, "I'm soft, but I'm not harmless." Her hair was a mass of curls pulled up with a pencil, and she had a smile that made you feel like you had just remembered something important and delightful. She looked up when I passed her table to the sugar station and said, "That scarf was made by someone who loves you." I turned. "My mom," I said, surprised at the sudden ache of missing her hands. "How'd you know?" "No machine makes mistakes that charming," she said, pointing to a row of stitches that wandered for 3 inches before correcting itself. "I'm Crystal," she added, like the introduction came with the observation. "Josh," I said. "Josh," she repeated like it had an aftertaste she liked. "Sit?" I sat. Our first conversation wandered the way good ones do, across weather and books and the conspiracy of tote bags we both carried as if they were portable basements. She asked what I did, and I told her the truth that felt safer now than it had ever felt. Data analyst by day, clothing enthusiast by morning and night. She raised an eyebrow. I told her about pantyhose, about the way control tops can be a hug, about denier and gussets, about the simple physics of light on nylon. She didn't fetishize. She didn't flinch. She put her chin in her hand and said, "I like the way you talk about feeling." Then she told me about her blog, long, punchy essays about queer literature and how coffee culture is just ritual with a cover charge. And I pulled it up on my phone and recognized her voice in the sentences, the way her commas looked like they had been arranged by a kind hand. We started meeting at that coffee shop and then at others, a place in Bushwick with a neon sign that read, "We're all just collaging ourselves." A cozy spot in Inwood where the barista always played Ethiopiques, and the light was so flattering it felt like a lie. Crystal had a way of reading near me that didn't exclude me, like we were both listening to the same song on different instruments. I learned that she collected little zines the way some people collect houseplants. I learned that she once bleached her hair at 3 a.m. because she wanted to feel like a comet. I learned that she wrote more than blog posts, novel-shaped things that sat on her laptop like sleeping cats. She was 28 and called herself quirky in the way that tells you the person has made peace with the adjective other people have pinned on them. One evening, snow half-hearted on the sidewalk, I told her about the clinic. "I have an appointment," I said, aware that the sentence had multiple endings. "I think I might start hormones." Crystal nodded, slow. "Because you want to feel more like yourself?" "Yes," I said, because that was the axis. And also, because I wanted the world to read me with fewer errors. Because I was tired of the math of passing this way in this space and that way in that one. Because I loved silk slips and dresses not as a costume, but as a language. She cupped her mug, fingers going red at the knuckles. "I like you so much," she said, and then smiled in that surprised way people do when surprise is joy wearing a disguise. "I like your legs in tights because they look like how confidence feels. I like your suits because your shoulders get an honest line. I like your voice when you're ordering coffee and when you're telling me about old speak words for weather that doesn't exist anymore. I like your masculinity. I like your femininity. I don't want you to cut off one half to prove the other is real." I breathed. The room felt newly plotted, like someone had redrawn the fire exits. What if cutting one half off would make the other sing? I asked. "Then we figure out how to harmonize," she said. "I'm not telling you what to do with your body. I'm telling you I fell for both of you. If there are 10 of you in there, I'll make a chart." She wrote lists when she was anxious, the small rectangular notebook in which she cataloged birds she'd seen in the park and sentences she didn't want to forget. We made a list together that night, not pros and cons, but found and keep. Found, ease in my skin when silk touches it. Keep, the laugh Kate said she loved once, the one that made my shoulders go up. Found, the feeling of walking through the city and being greeted as ladies at a brunch place and noticing it didn't make me flinch. Keep, shaving on Sundays, because I like the ritual when the mirror is all steam and intimacy. Found, my urge to soften certain angles. Keep, the run in my voice when I talk about my father teaching me to change a tire in the rain. In the next weeks, we circled each other's fears without pretending they would disappear if we hugged hard enough. I went to the clinic again and asked more questions. I sat with Viv by the river and told her I had the appointment card stuck to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. Viv said, "There's no prize for rushing, baby. There's also no prize for waiting. There's just what lets you sleep." Crystal and I kissed in the doorway of my studio, in the shadow of the radiator's hiss, in the aisle of a used bookstore where the poetry leaned like drunk friends. She touched my collarbone and I went quiet in that grateful way a person does when attention has landed somewhere they didn't know needed it. I liked being read as a woman by a waiter and as a man by a neighbor and as a person by Crystal. Full stop. I liked the way she said my name when I wore a slip. I liked the way she said my name when I wore a tie. I liked that she teased me for folding my pantyhose like documents and then asked me to teach her the method because my drawer is a war. One Saturday, we went to a clothing swap at a community center. There were tables piled with sizes and shapes and histories. I brought the dress that didn't feel like me anymore, not because of its femininity, but because it demanded a performance I didn't want to put on. I left with a soft, gray blazer that fit like it had been measuring me from afar. Crystal found a pair of cherry red flats and a jacket that made her look like she had a motorcycle and a day job. We went to a diner after, and she took a photo of me in the booth. Blazer over a slip, tights, and boots, and showed it to me. I looked like a sentence that had finally found its period. We talked about Kate once, on purpose, like turning a compost pile. I told Crystal I had wanted revenge, wanted to arrive at Kate's brunch table like an event. Crystal squeezed my hand and said, "You're not a push notification." Then she told me about the woman who had left her because she didn't want to date potential. And we laughed and laughed because the alternative is to cry into pie. On the day before my follow-up, the day I had circled on the calendar with a pen that bled through the paper, I stood in front of my closet and looked at a scarf and a tie hanging side by side like a joke about binary that had given up being funny and become sweet. I called Crystal. "Walk?" I asked. We met by the river. I wore a dress and a denim jacket. She wore the bomber with the enamel pins and a grin that made me stop and take a breath because my heart did a small, excellent stumble. We walked and didn't talk for a while, the water doing its repetitive miracle. "I want to start," I said finally. "But I want to start like a door opening in degrees, not like a door slammed. I want to lift the corners of myself and see what stays and what goes. I want not to disappear into a single pronoun because I am in love with the way they all fail to hold me." She nodded like she'd been waiting for my mouth to catch up with my bones. "I'm here. If you decide next week you want to stop, I'm here. If you decide you want to double down, I'm here. If you decide to make a spreadsheet of your feelings, I will mock you gently and then help format it. I like your masculinity. I like your femininity. I want to date you, plural." I laughed in relief, shoulders up, eyes closed. I took her hand and felt the spark that isn't fireworks as much as it's the power coming back on in a neighborhood after a long storm. We kissed. It wasn't a solving. It was an agreement to be unsolved together. When I went to the clinic the next day, I asked for more time. Not because I was afraid, though fear sat politely in the waiting room, reading a pamphlet. Because possibility felt like a fabric I hadn't finished touching. The doctor smiled as if to say, "Adults are allowed to change their minds." She gave me more reading. I bought myself a pair of pantyhose with a back seam down the calf, a little ritual of precision I could practice while the larger decisions breathed. I still think of Kate sometimes. The way you think of a house you almost bought when you walk by it years later and see a kid's bike on the porch and a wind chime catching weather. I hope she is loved in a language that suits her. I hope Evan makes her coffee in the right ratio and that she tells him if he gets it wrong. I hope they go to brunch and don't look up and find me at their table because I am busy living on mine. Some evenings I make dinner in my slip and blazer, nylon hugging my legs, apron tied loose. Crystal arrives with a stack of stapled zines and the insistence that we try a new spice. We eat on the floor because the table is covered in drafts. We read our favorite paragraphs out loud. We make out, which is its own paragraph. We argue about small things, the ethics of tote bags, the right number of throw pillows, and then laugh because the texture of our life is better than bare furniture. I walk in New York a lot, finding myself in the city the way some people find themselves in churches. I look at windows and watch myself pass through them. Sometimes I look like a man in a scarf. Sometimes I look like a woman in a skirt. Sometimes I look like a person at peace in a body that has learned new tricks. I check my reflection the way you check a stove. You don't doubt it. You just like to be sure. I keep a drawer of pantyhose folded like maps. I keep a hook for a tie and a locket. I am not a revenge story. I am, maybe, a love story that curves back to include me. Crystal would say it better, with footnotes. On Sundays, when the city is quieter and the light throws itself onto my floor like a cat, I sit with my legs out and run my palms over the even pressure of nylon. I think of the boy I was who wanted to soften and didn't have the words. I think of the man I was who tried to explain softness to a person who wanted something else. I think of the multitude I am becoming. I put on the blazer. I text Crystal. Coffee? She texts back a photo of a table waiting. I go out into a city that keeps letting me join it again and again, in whatever version of myself shows up at the door. I keep walking, and I keep choosing fabrics that tell the truth my mouth is still learning to say. And I keep believing that love is not asking me to pick a single lane, but to drive with my hands steady and my eyes open through a city where every block is a possibility and every window is a mirror and a window at the same time.